Hello, my name is Feng. Welcome to Concept Design 1. In this DVD, we're going to cover the basics of markers. First, I'm going to show you how to use markers to sketch out a vehicle, then use a pen to ink it, and finally, use additional markers to render it. On the second part of the DVD, we're going to draw another vehicle, but this time, I'm going to show you some techniques and perspectives to figure out its proportions, thus we can draw the same vehicle from a different point of view. Also on this DVD, we're going to cover a little bit about thumbnails, some basics of perspective, and a little bit of information about the materials I use. So let's get started. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about thumbnails before we get started with the final drawing. Right? Before we do the drawing, we have to capture our idea first on paper. And the way I do that is by using little small thumbnails. And since there are thumbnails, I'm going to zoom in and show you how they're done. Let's see, okay, that should be good. So we're doing vehicles here. So what I have to do is just generate a couple of ideas on paper before I commit to the one to do. Right? But I don't take that much shortcuts either. I still put my perspective lines in there to do some of these thumbnails. For example, right there. And this will go into more detail as we do the final drawing as far as what these lines are doing. I just want to show you a little bit of how ideas are generated on the paper. Right? Very quick. Because what I'm after here is actually, maybe big engine here. It's just the idea, the overall shape. Right. And they're nice and quick. They're for yourself to put your ideas on paper. Right. You don't have to show these to anybody. So really have fun with these guys. Feel free to explore whatever idea you want. Right. And that's what this whole process is. It's kind of like seeing your brain on paper. So that's one, design. It's okay. We can try another one. And they're relatively loose, nice and quick. Little cockpit right there, right? Again, just exploring ideas, exploring shapes. And I'm doing this quite fast, even because even letting my pen flow, I can find some nice shapes. Instead of thinking about it super hard, I just want to let this pen find the shapes for me. For example, right here, I could do another engine back here. Little wings, just drop a shadow down. Right, really loose stuff. Little thumbnail, little guys walking around. Right? So really start, put a guy here. Just develop some ideas. Let's do a few more. Okay. Again, nice and quick. Let your pen find it. Maybe that's a cockpit. There. Maybe some kind of engine. Yeah, other side. Just quick. Balance it out with some fins here and there. Alright, something like that. A couple of guys down here. Let's drop a shadow on this guy as well. Just pop these guys out. Right, just super quick. Darken these guys up if you like what you see there, right? And to keep yourself memory which designs you like, right? A quick way to do that is either you could use a pencil and just highlight some of this stuff, or you could use a marker if you want. Right? Just throw in a little bit of value like that. Just even something like that will remind you, right, of what designs you want to pick. So right now, if you look at it instantly, this one pops out of all three. So let's see. Let's do one more. Yeah. Some engines. These are little spaceships since we're doing a vehicle for our demo. Just trying to generate some cool looking vehicles. And just like that, generate some ideas. Right, not worry about details or anything like that. Just going after overall shape and design. And that's what thumbnail allows you to do, because all you see are the shapes, right? All this stuff in here, there's some details, but very minor, right? It's all about the design at this point, right? So say we like that guy, we go in, and drop a marker. So for this demo, we could probably just choose this guy. It looks pretty good. I like his proportion. Nice, long, wide nose cone. Got these two engines on both sides. Nice scale to this guy. And for this one, we can make it a little bit bigger. Maybe put the guy at that size. Let me zoom in so you guys can see how loose these guys are. So there, and here's some previous ones, right? Maybe this is a walker guy. Put legs in them, right? And this is another vehicle. Guys around. So that's how we generate ideas on paper, nice and quick. And you can spend much time as you want. You could do a whole hour's worth of thumbnails, or if you capture your idea quickly, then 1 or 2 is good enough to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and bring these thumbnails to a next stage, which is the drawing. Alright? Okay, so let's get started. The first thing we're going to do here is lay in our center line, and this is going to perspective here to the vanishing point to your right. Alright? So we're going to make that line as straight as you can. Now we're going to lay in some perspective lines that's going to your left vanishing point. And remember, these are convergent, they're not parallel, so make sure you get that right. Keep your line straight as you can. You can use a ruler at this point if you wish to keep your lines pretty straight. It's quite important at this early stage to keep all your lines relatively accurate and straight, because the more perfect they are here, the lot easier you'll go for your drawing. So notice I'm laying a couple of vertical lines as well. Not that many needed for this drawing like this, because it's mostly a side view drawing. So now I'm going to start laying in some of the helper lines to help me draw this vehicle out, going off the center line. Now what a center line is, just think of it as a cut line through something that's symmetrical. For example, if you take a car, you cut it down the middle, and imagine there's a line going through it, and that's what your center line is. And we're going to use that line to adjust and do our drawing with. Notice I flipped the page upside down just real quickly there. That's to check my perspective. Right? One of the quickest ways to check perspective is to actually just flip the page or look at it upside down or anything you can, because perspective works no matter what angle you're looking at. Okay, here we lay in the initial drawings. I'm going to use marker, and notice how I did a little cross section, almost a side view off the center line, and we're going to build our design from the middle back out. Okay, always drawing out from center. So what we're doing is drawing a side view almost from the center line and projecting it into space. So one's coming towards camera and the other one's going away from camera. Okay. I'm just going to lay in some couple more lines here. So whatever you draw that's toward camera, we measure to the center line and go across and make it symmetrical. But keep in mind, because it is in perspective, things are going to foreshorten just a bit. So when you measure off the center line, things get compressed just a little bit further away from camera. So here I'm laying in a couple more details. This is going to be the cockpit area of our vehicle. At this point, I don't worry too much about details or anything like that, because we do that once we start inking. Right now I just want to get the overall vehicle down with the marker to make sure everything's working. Using a pretty light marker here, this is a 10%, but it's still strong enough for you to see it. But the thing is, if you do take this drawing right now and photocopy it, nothing's really going to show up on the photocopy machine, because it is so light. Essentially, you could do this process with the pencil as well if you wish. It's all up to your choice here. But I tend to use marker because the finishing material I'm going to use on this drawing is also marker. So when I do the final marker stage, everything just blends together very nicely. So here I'm drawing in more forms here with the marker, calculating out where the engine's going to go here. So I put a little bit of value once in a while. You can see me making a line slightly thicker. That's just for areas that's quite important, like the bottom of the ship, an engine part, the cockpit, things like that. That I gotta make sure I see once I finish this drawing, right? Because the marker is pretty light, and if I don't do it heavy enough, once in a while I actually can't see what I drew. So I put in a little bit of heavy line weight here and there just to pop the shapes and forms out. So here I'm just trying to design here and see what elements I could put in here to make the this vehicle more interesting. So I'm going to put in a big engine over here. Right. And you see me doing a lot of those little dots, right? From time to time I have these dots, and that's the way I do my measurements, right? From center line. So I drew an engine right here to the, I guess, the left of the ship, if we're sitting in the cockpit. And I measure the distance of that engine away from center line and project it into perspective on the other side. And that's how I calculate where the other engine is. Right. And I'm going to draw this engine slightly at an angle, about a 25-degree angle here. Let's draw in some details. But once again, all the detail at this point is just some of the major things. I never go in there and do the blades and all that stuff that's super complicated and detailed. I do that once I start inking. Okay, make sure I throw some values in there for the engine so I can see it, so it's nice and clear. Putting some minor design elements here and there. And I think I'm going to put a little bit of wings or something on this engine. I have to decide. So let's finish the back side first. Yeah, looks pretty good. Alright, need to collect connecting point from the body to these engines. So let's put that in there. Okay, looks pretty good. So let's put in maybe, try to decide here what to put in here. But first thing, let's just repeat this engine on the other side. So right now I'm measuring away, right, into space using my center line to judge how far that engine is. Right, see me laying the additional perspective lines to help guide and find the other side of this engine. Right. And that line's converging again to the vanishing point to your left. And here I'm going to add in a little bottom section just to beef up the design a little bit. So I do go from place to place on the drawing when I'm working. I tend to bounce around. That way, just whatever feels right, I just lay a line in. I don't necessarily work from left to right or bottom to top. Just kind of just go all around, get everything drawn out all at the same time. Beef up the lines a little more. So on this demo, I'm doing a little bit more beefing than I probably need to do as far as line weight goes with the marker than I usually do. Mainly because if I do draw it just with the number 0 or number 1 marker, a lot of it's not going to show up on video here because it's too light. So I'm beefing the lines up just a bit so it'll show up nice and clear on the recording here. Put some minor details here and there. Trying to just figure out what kind of stuff to put in there. Some detailed support beams to hold these massive engines up. Some small vent holes to add a little bit of scale to that. So it's looking pretty good, but I still feel like it's unbalanced. So I'm probably going to throw in some additional fins here and there to balance the design out a little bit more. So let's try to put it right there. So let's see how far we need to do that. Okay, that looks pretty good. Again, do it one side, and then we're going to draw through using the center line and measure. See how I put the dot right in the middle? That's going to help me measure the distance away from center that additional fin is, so I can find it on the other side. Let's see, I'm drawing right into the body of the vehicle. At that point, you actually cannot see the fin, but I'm still going to calculate and draw it out as if it's a see-through. And think of it as a wireframe almost on a computer, a 3D wireframe. So to find the other side, you have to almost draw everything out just to make sure that everything's included. Because sometimes you calculate it out and actually see almost nothing of the other side, but you still have to do it just to make sure. so I think I'm going to add another piece here to balance out the fins on the front. So let's just add that in here. Trying to decide here where to put it so it's correct. Let's check perspective real quick as well. Looks pretty good. Remember, flipping it upside down and mirroring it is a great way to check perspective. If something's wrong, your eyes will pick that up a lot quicker because you're looking at it from a whole new perspective, a different view. Okay, some minor details here and there. Okay, let's put that fin in right here. About there is pretty good. Now that fin, let me see if you see on the other side. It's going to do a quick calculation. Again, at this point, I'm not too worried about what exactly is on the other side because you'll see a little later on as I ink this guy. We're going to do a little bit of fading with our line weight, and that engine that's way in the distance there, we're not going to put too much line weight on it, so it fades away and gives an illusion of depth. Okay, let's add some last minute touch-ups here and there. Make sure we like the design. And at this point, because marker is so light, you can actually make some pretty dramatic changes. And at the end, a lot of that stuff you drew that you don't ink in will actually just kind of disappear or actually add to the drawing. So if you do want to make changes at this point, for example, add an engine in the middle or make the fins bigger, it's completely up to you. You can still do it. Right? Just imagine the marker you're using actually does not show up on your finish. Then you have more confidence in trying out new shapes. So when you see me here, I'm trying to see if I need to add anything. But before that, I'm going to ground this guy up a little bit with a little bit of ground shadow. And the way to do this is it's pretty easy to do. What you need to do is measure off the center again and find the ground. How high do you want this vehicle to be off the ground? And using that, you just drag a vertical line down from your design, from all your shapes, to the ground plane, right? A straight line down. Then you just project the shapes straight down, and that forms your ground shadow. Right? And this will be more clear once I start inking it in, and you'll see where all the lines go. Right? But at this point, I could estimate a little bit of where the shadow is going to be. And it's going to pop the shape out from the paper, and also grounds a little bit. It makes it look like it's sitting on the paper, and just further enhances the feeling of 3D. And because you're working on a 2D surface, which is a piece of paper, you're always fighting against the medium, right? We're drawing something in perspective here, but because the medium itself, the paper, is a 2D format, you have to do every trick you can to get the viewer to think that this drawing is sitting in a 3D space. So things like shadow, perspective, lighting, all that adds in the illusion that the shape is in 3D space. So here I'm just going to lay in some very light marker just to give it a ground shadow. See how that helps put the ship onto into space? Now it's sitting on the page now, and it's got a lot of weight to it as well. And here I'm putting little guys for scale. Right? It's always good when you design a vehicle or a prop to show the proper scale, so your viewer, even if you're not present, can see this drawing and realize how big it is. Right? Okay, so let's do a check. Looks pretty good. Putting some fine details here and there. Darken some areas up so you can really see the marker before we go into inking. Let's do a little check here and there. Looks pretty good. Beef that up a little bit. Alright. I feel like that needs to be a little bit more beefed up so I can see it. Because this marker does tend to dry. So if I don't use it for a while, or do the marker first and walk away for a little bit, actually by the time I get back, it's going to get pretty light. So I'm going to beef up some of this stuff just in case. Alright. Okay, looks pretty good. We're probably ready to go into inking in about a minute or so from now. Just last minute checks, make sure perspective is good, and I think that looks pretty good. We can start inking. Yep, looks good. Alright. Okay, so let's go ahead and ink this guy in with our permanent ink pen here. The first thing I'm going to do here is putting a couple of dots here and there this is the way I work. It's kind of using dots, very similar to those books you buy for kids. You see the little dots, and all you do is connect the dots, right? And so I'm similar process here. So I'm gonna lay in some dots here and there to hold my shape. And all I do is, once I'm confident where the positions of the dots are, I just connect them with a line, right? So you see me going there and putting all these little dots, right? Ding, ding, dots here and there. And once I find the position of them are right, I'm just gonna lay in a line. Now watch when I start putting the lines in. Watch my wrist. See how it does not move at all? I'm doing all these lines using my elbow as the pivot point. And it's a key way to drawing straight lines. If you use your wrist, you can only go so far. So small distances is fine. You can get lines pretty accurately with your wrist. But if you want something a little longer, say 1 to 2 inches, even longer than that, you probably have to use your elbow to get a nice swing. Alright, and that's what I'm doing here. So notice, watch, as I hit these lines here, I'm using a lot of my elbow to hit them. Right, for example, right here, boom, hit the line. Now another thing I'm doing here is I'm ghosting the line before I put it down. What I mean by that is you have your dots measured out. So I train my hand to go back and forth like that, right? Watch, back and forth. And once I feel confident, I lay the line in. So goes, put the line in. So the ghosting is the first few tries you're doing is just training your brain to hit that line. So all you have to do is get into the right motion, and when you feel like it's correct, just drop the pen. So it goes, I always do that for every line I do. 1, 2, drop, goes, drop. So especially for the longer lines, you see as I doing some of the major lines coming up here, do quite a bit of ghosting, and then just drop the pen. So let's check some of this. For example, right here, see me ghosting? That's about 3-4 ghosts, and then drop the line. Same with here, drop the line, right? And the reason why I know where to put these lines is because I put those dots in a little earlier, right? So all I'm doing now is just connecting the dots, making the form come alive here. Same with that one, curve, boom, drop the line. So keep an eye on my elbow and wrist there. So for anything long, a line that's pretty straight or nice curve, it's always done using my elbow that's sitting on the table, right? And that's just pivoting left to right, help me create straight lines or curves. And a great way to train yourself in doing that is just get a piece of paper, put a couple of dots on it, maybe 1 to 2 inches apart. Put your elbow on the table, swing across, and see if you can connect the 2 dots with a straight line. All right. And once you do that, the only difference you're doing here is you're making a design of it. So, but essentially you're using the same technique, just connecting dots. So see those little points everywhere on my page, little dots, that's what I'm doing. So when the drawing is done, I actually end up with a lot of those little dots here and there, but it kind of adds to the piece as well. It makes it look kind of very loose, very sketchy. Because the drawing we're doing here is supposed to be a quick marker sketch, something that should be done probably within an hour to an hour and a half. It's definitely something we're not spending so much time on making it super tight. This is a very concept, early stage piece here, where we want to finish as many as we can in a day. Another thing about a quick sketch is I do my design, the finer details, during the inking process. Right? We want to make sure the silhouette is strong, and that's the stuff we do with the marker. The overall shape, make sure it's all working, the proportions are balanced, the perspective is correct. So if you have the major silhouette and proportions down, the fine detail, especially at this level, it's not too important. They are important in the fact that they help sell your shape. But say you put round boats versus oval boats on the cockpit, it's not going to affect the design too much until you look at it very closely. For example, here I could put in a vertical or a curved shape, but it's so small for detail, it's not going to change my design. Now if I add a big wing right now on the top of the cockpit, now that's going to start changing my silhouette, right? So all the details I'm adding right now is contained within the initial drawing. And that's what I'm doing with all these little details. Now, as far as adding details goes, you don't want to overdo it. Remember, the first thing to keep in mind is make sure your overall design is reading. That's this entire vehicle. And the second level of detail you want to put is make sure that the certain areas of the vehicle shows up. For example, the engines, the cockpit, maybe some of those fins are pretty clearly drawn out. And the last details you put, you have to distribute just barely here and there. If I went in there and drew every single nut and bolt, this vehicle is going to look too tight, and all the life in the sketch is going to be taken away because you spent way too much time detailing. So you want to distribute your details to areas that you need it. And I'm going to talk about that a little later as we get further into the inking as far as where to pop your details in and where to leave them out. But even at this stage, you can kind of see where detail level is really going to go. A lot of it, of course, is going to be in the cockpit area because that is where a lot of the focus is going to be on a vehicle. It's where the people, where the user are going to be. Another part is part of the engine closest to the camera, and that would be the left engine if you're sitting inside that vehicle, right? And the engine further back to my left right now, right? That engine drawn very lightly is going to fade into the distance. Yeah, again, I'll cover that once we get there. So now let's just get the majority of the shapes inked in. Put some of the nice lines through it. This thing is probably an air scoop of some kind. And see how I spin the page? That's another thing that goes with drawing straight lines. Now when I swing my elbow around, let's zoom in here real quick to show you the line weight. Alright. When I swing my elbow around, I can only hit the straight line from a certain angle. It's probably a 25-30 degree. See the page right there? Right. I have to get a certain angle to hit that straight line. So instead of drawing a straight line and keeping the paper perfectly parallel to the table, which makes it very hard to draw straight lines. For example, if the straight line is vertical, I won't be able to use my elbow to swing to get that line. What I do is I just spin the paper around to the angle that I need it to be. So whenever you see a line that I need to draw, the paper is constantly being spun to match the angle I could draw that line at. And everybody has a certain, range where they can hit that straight line or a curve. So you can find yours and get used to spinning the page. Of course, if you're using a ruler for all the lines, you necessarily don't have to do any of this. But this is a quick sketch meant to be done by hand. But if you're not too confident with your line work yet, feel free to use a ruler for this stuff. Let's start hitting some more details to get that thin area. So once again, putting the dots to measure out the distance. Alright, dots, dots, connect the line. Dots, dots, connect the line. Alright, 2 dots, connect the line. And there you go, that's out. So let's do the other side. Dot, line, dot, line, dot, dot, line. So that's how we construct all the forms here. Just putting some fine details, how this thing is being held. A little connector point. Now see these lines I'm putting across all the forms? Those are called the section lines or panel lines on a vehicle. For example, next time you ride in an airplane, take a look at the wings on a big plane like a 747. It's a very big shape, pretty simple, right? But if you look at it closely, it's actually made out of a lot of different pieces. And those lines are panel lines. So when we do a vehicle like this, which is a sci-fi thing here, to help sell that's real or has a lot of scale, you tend to put in some panel lines to help that. If the whole entire vehicle is made out of one giant shape, it's very unlikely they'll manufacture something that huge of one piece, right? So the panel lines help that. But the main thing for panel line is it actually helps you describe form. For example, in this case, we have that nose section in front of this vehicle. It's got a slight curve to it. So when I put a section line or panel line across it, right, it actually helps describe what that shape is. So it kind of serves two purposes. If I do more, I'll show you what I mean here. Just put in a couple more details here and there. For example, that's a panel line. This is showing that that side is relatively straight, but that's a curve. You see that? That's a little bulge that's coming out of the section that I put a curve panel line across. So just with one line, I'm able to describe that shape. Okay, doing the last details for that area there, holding that up. More panel lines here and there. Just putting some additional panel line, cut lines just little details here and there to help it give a lot of scale. This vehicle is quite big, as you can see the little people marked out by marker on the bottom there, right under my hand. It's supposed to be meant to be little people standing around watching this vehicle. Let me zoom in here. So these little details here and there is going to really help enhance our scale and sell this thing as being very big. So even at this point, you can see that a lot of the marker that I'm doing is disappearing under the ink. Under the areas where I inked, it's almost gone, where, I mean, it's physically there, but because the ink is so strong in value, it's pure black there, that it makes your marker, the number 10%, seem almost non-existent. So by the time you have this whole thing inked out, you barely notice that the marker is actually there. Right? Especially if you take this drawing and photocopy it, it's all going to disappear, and the only thing you're going to see is your line work. So here I'm going to ink in some of the engine parts. Again, using the connected dots method, where we've got dots, connect, align, dot, dot, connect. Right. So a lot of ghosting as well, where I just ghost a line in. Example here, I'm going to ghost, and drop the pen, boom, and hit that line. Let's make this engine a little bit of scoop on the side, so it's not a straight line down. Now when you do these straight lines, notice I just over-crossed the line there, right? The lines didn't come to a perfect stop. They actually overshot the other previous line. But that's okay, because this is a quick sketch, and all those little fine details, the crossing over the line, actually adds to the feeling of the sketch of being quick and loose. If every single line connected perfectly, then the drawing will look too tight, right? It's too perfect. So it's okay once in a while to have a little bit. But of course, if you overdo that, every single line is crossing, then your drawing's going to start looking pretty messy. But some major lines here and there is okay. And some fine details. So at this point in the sketch, I already know what my focus of attention is going to be on a sketch. Right? You always want to think in terms of reading, right? And what I mean by that is when someone looks at the sketch, you want to direct their eye to where you want them to look and not what they choose to do. So in this case, when someone looks at the sketch, I want them to pay attention to the engine, the cockpits, and the overall form, right? But I don't want to look at the back engine that much, nor the back section of the ship. So I'm going to put my details and contrast where I want the viewer to look. And that's even more apparent once you start marking this thing in. So that's why I'm adding all these details up to the engine, right? Because this section, along with the cockpit, is going to receive a lot of little details. Let's put in this little air scoop. Another panel line to describe form, another one right there. See how it's curved on the top, and then you know that's coming to a flat surface when it goes down. Like that. That's another panel line I'm helping with. And right now I'm not worrying too much about line weight. I'm going to do that after the entire sketch is worked out. Right now I'm just worried about, more concerned about getting the whole thing drawn out. Making sure there's details here and there. I'm not worried at all about adding line weight. We're going to do that as soon as we get this thing inked. Putting the exhaust on the engine. So even for short lines like that, I'm using my elbow to hit those straight lines rather than using my wrist. Because I've been so used to drawing straight lines using the elbow that even any tiny little line, I'm doing it that way. For example, right there, right? Wrist is not moving, it's just the elbow. Again, connecting dots, hit. Little details to add the connecting point. And here we're going to have some gibblies here and there, some joints. Okay, just beef that up a little bit. So for this stuff, because this is a quick sketch, I don't want to think about too much exactly what's going on. What I'm going to do is try to indicate some parts that's happening in there, right? If this design turns out to be the one that your client or you like and want to turn into a more refined drawing, you can actually go back and add some details to those areas. But right now, to worry too much about that just slows you down. You really just want to indicate it to whoever's looking at it that it's believable, that it is a functional area. But of course, the more you know about mechanical things, especially for something like this, is the man-made vehicle, the more you know about how mechanics work. For example, joints, gears, and things like that. You can incorporate a lot of that into your drawing. So even though in real life it might not make perfect sense, it's going to sell it. The design has a believability to it. So a lot about all these details and things you're adding. It's just taking things that exist in the real world and incorporating it into your design. So even though this is a made-up sci-fi vehicle here, I'm still using a lot of real-world shapes. You got engines, you got thrusts, you got little panels here and there. That's helping to believe that it's made by human beings here. So now I'm going to start going in, because we have it inked. I'm going to add some fine details and start beefing up the details a little more and start incorporating a little bit of line weight. But let me finish this section first. Alright, this has a connector point. But again, notice this engine, the one that's closest to camera. Right? It's nice and big. I want that to make sure it pops up in front of the vehicle itself. So if I over detail this section right here, right, it's going to start competing for the engine. So you don't know which one's in front anymore. So if I leave this area not too detailed and have my engine nice and detailed, it's going to pull one shape over another. So this stuff I'm going to put a little bit detail in the front, and the rest of it is kind of indicated to keep it nice and loose. Right. So all I have to do is just put some shapes in there, make it believable that it is some kind of joint mechanism going on in there. But definitely not full of gears and gribblies that it's going to start competing for details. Just some support beams on major shapes to help the viewer believe that there's something inside. Something like that. Right. Some gears. Looks like it's some kind of transitional piece. So very solid, right? That has a pretty strong piece there to support that giant engine. But that's good enough. I don't need to touch it anymore. Let's go back to the cockpit. Add some details here and there. Some window slots. Some windows. Right. And this stuff is the one that gives a lot of scale. I believe that this vehicle is big. So my main selling point on this vehicle again is the engines and cockpit areas. So I've got to make sure these areas are finely detailed. Notice I'm not even touching the engine to the back there. Right. That stuff is going to fade away. Okay, some last minute details here and there. Let's check the drawing. Looks pretty good. This little front scoop. So I'll beef that up a little bit there. Not too sure what that was right there. Just wanted to correct it, add something there, but we'll leave that alone for now. Add a little details here and there. These tiny details are the ones that's going to really help explain the size of this vehicle, right? You put little connecting points with rivets here and there. It's really going to help sell it. So still drawing, putting lines down. And I've had to beef up the areas where panel lines are coming together. Notice me putting those little darker dots here and there. That's just to help enhance some of the joint areas. So for example, when two lines are coming together, by putting a little bit of dark mark in between them, you get the sense that they're joining up. Two lines are forming together. So now, let's get the other engine in there. I'm going to come in with a ruler. Just lay a couple of straight lines. I want to make sure that this really goes into perspective here. So I'm going to lay in some perspective lines. Again, these are vanishing into your left vanishing point, right? They're converging. So notice the front ones are going at a certain angle, and the ones that are in the back are going towards the same vanishing point. They're all converging to a point. And I'm doing this stuff by eye here. I'm not measuring. So you can just set up a perspective table and physically draw a dot into space and measure using a long ruler your your perspective lines. But in this case, I'm just going to eyeball it just to make sure the lines are converging. And using that, I can start measuring out the other side of the engine, right? I'm going to draw my center line back in right there. And using that center line, I'm going to measure the distance between it and the front engine and the center line to the back engine. So that way I can tell how much of it you see and where it is in relative space. See that? Measure the front of the engine. It's probably right there off the center line. That off center line. Let's connect some points. Now this engine, because it is in the back, we're not going to put much detail as the one in the front. So you'll fade away nicely into the background and give the viewer the idea that it's sitting way in the back there. And also, not only does it help with distance, it's also a time saver, because for a vehicle like this that's symmetrical, you have a design already of one side of the engine. So whoever's going to take a look at this sketch and turn it into a 3D model or a physical model, if anything of that kind, they're going to understand that those two engines are the same. So when they're modeling it, they're only going to look pretty much to the one that you've drawn the most detail out and just copy that shape to the other side. So you can save yourself some time just by detailing one and leaving the other one faded, because they're essentially the same shape. Save yourself some time drawing it twice. What you want to do is kind of indicate that thing on the other side, that engine part, by pulling some major shapes from the design. So for example, the engine has little grills that goes vertically throughout, so you're going to repeat some of that. It's got that tail guard right there that we're going to put on that side. It's got the thrust, right? And those are the things that are going to make your viewer believe that that is the same shape, mirror to the other side. Right. Some last minute touches here and there before we go in and add our line weight. At this point, the vehicle is pretty much inked out. It's reading pretty nicely. Details here and there. And the initial marker stage is really starting to disappear. Right? Especially if you blur your eye at this point, you can see that the line work is a lot stronger than the initial marker. I'm putting a couple of little details, little dents here and there. This vehicle does fly around in space or hazardous areas maybe, so it gets dented up quite a bit. I don't know, panel line. Again, notice the panel line helping with describing form. It's at a slight curve. These are just last minute details before we start doing the line weight. So almost done. Just go through it, add it here and there. Just drawing our little guys real quick to give a scale. And these could go really, pretty quickly. Just indicate a scale. I don't have to go in there and noodle a lot of details into these guys. Something like that is good enough. It looks like people walking around, standing, looking at it. And that adds a lot of scale to it as well. Okay, it looks pretty good. So I think we're ready to go ahead and add some line weight into this guy. Yep, alright. Okay, we're ready to add our line weight. Now, instead of using the pen I just used, which is a pretty thin 0.3 thickness, we could use a variety of other pens that's slightly thicker to save us time when adding line weight. So that's a 0.4, slightly thicker. But I have another pen here, a pigment liner, that's even thicker than both of these pens. So it's up to you to choose one to use to do the line weight. Yep, that's the 0.3. Don't want to use that. Let's put that away. Let's go ahead and grab our 0.4. Let's use that one. For now, see how far that gives us. So now I'm going to add some line weight. Now the way to think about line weight is you want to put in line weight to help cover the overall shape and to direct the viewer on where they want to see. So see the overall shape, just point out there a little bit. Make sure those things read. And for anything that's closer to camera, I tend to put a line weight as well. So for example, this fin and the engine later on that's closer to camera, those are going to get a lot of line weight because they're in front of everything else. And also for things that has a bottom edge, for example, that's bottom edge of a shape. By putting line weight, actually helps the drawing to think that it is an edge that's above another shape. So we're going to put that in. All right, here comes the engine. This guy's going to get a lot of line weight because it's the closest thing to camera. So we really want to pop that out to say that it's in front. So put this line in. So I'm using a thicker pen, so that way I don't need to draw the line over and over. If I was using a thin 0.3 pen that I did the inking with, I have to go over the line probably 3-4 times to get it pretty thick. With this one, even with one line, it's a lot thicker than before. And if I do want to beef it up a little more, I just go over it twice, maybe 3 times, it'll get really thick. Right. Let's take a look here. Let's do this side. Now the thing to avoid now is to draw a thick line around every single object. Because what that does, it's going to make your drawing look like it's a sticker. It's going to flatten it out. You put all this effort into making the shapes pop in and out, right? Some in front, some in back. If you put a thick line around everything, that's going to bring everything to one perspective again. It's going to seem like it's flat, that it's stuck on the page, right? And the goal here is to really create an illusion that this is a 3D object and sitting inside a virtual 3D space. So right now you can already see that one engine is already in front of the other one, and it's also in front of the body here. There's some details. I'll catch you to that later. Little holes kind of on the side. For now, let's get the rest of the form drawn out. Thicker. Starting to work. Let's just keep working on line weight until we're pretty happy with the results here. Beef up that front edge, put a little bit here. Alright, starting to work. Let me zoom in so you can see the difference between a thin line and a thick one. Right? See how that outer edge is really beginning to thicken up right there? And that really pops your shape out by doing that. Again, even doing this step, I'm being relatively pretty loose here. Right. I never want to go in there and just do a perfect trace. I'm still drawing pretty quickly here, right? Lines don't have to be super perfect. That's the undercut of a shape, so darken a little bit more. That's also an underside of a shape. Let's look around. So this engine now, see, it has to be stronger in contrast to the one in the back. Zoom out, let you see progress so far. So let's switch pens. Let's switch to pigment liner so you can see the difference. It's going to be pretty minute here. They both have about the same thickness, and I believe this pen is slightly thicker. And we can use that to do some of the blacks here. You see that? Little holes that's punched to the side of this spaceship. Just use this thicker pen and really punch them out here. And this pen, because it's a little slightly thicker, I can use it to add some black into our drawing here. And what this does is it actually creates some areas of contrast, right? Because it's going from black, right, on this white page. So anywhere those two meet, you're going to get a lot of contrast. For example, right there, you're going to see shapes pop in and out. Right. So whenever you have an area that needs high detail, you can actually pop in some black to really help that. For example, these little grills in the engine. It really pops it out. Same thing with this, these little gears that's down here. Just put some black here and there to really give an illusion that there's something happening down there. A lot of pipes and connecting joints. Without necessarily, going there and detailing everything. And if your drawing works in black and white, it's going to make it that much easier once you start marking this drawing up. Right? Because even if you do a minimal marker job on it, because it works in black and white in just ink form, and then no matter how far you get with markering, it's always going to look pretty finished. Versus if you need to spend a lot of time doing the markering and line drawing is not complete yet, then you're going to be spending a lot more time trying to make the shape read. Let's detail some the cockpit area in. This fin has an under scoop. Let's just bring that to black. And you can think of the areas that are black as just dark shadow areas. Shapes that are so deeply cut into the design that light doesn't penetrate it. So it's just relatively dark. And you can just see that on real world objects. Especially for a quick sketch like this. Adds a lot to the dimension of it. It started to come together pretty nicely, I think. So even at this point, I'm still using a dot system, right? 2 dots connect the point. Okay, sticking up some more lines. Just the process of building up, going from thin line to thick. Now this guy I'm going to have to be careful with. You can't overdo the line weight. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to repeat that shape and this one right here to sell that they are the same thing. Right? By putting in some darks here and there, we're just mirroring that stuff over. And it's giving an illusion right there as well, right? I'm going to repeat that. So with minimum detail, we could kind of suggest that those are the same shape, just mirrored. Beef up the windows. Because the windows, these are a little cut within glass, so they're undercuts. Beef them up. Okay, looks pretty good. Still nice and loose. Just check the drawing out, make sure everything's working out okay. Okay, let's go back with our fine pen. Just add a little bit more details here and there. Right, I feel like this engine still needs a little bit more details to really pop it and sell it that it is a very big object. Put some more dents, give it some wear and tear look to it. The bottom of those guys, again a shape that's going to overlapping another one, so I'm going to darken the bottom edges. Right, much better, I like that. Put in some more details. So I like to work all around the piece. Whatever I feel like needs something, I just do it. Not working strictly in one direction. Some more panel lines. I felt that section looks too bland. That we need to add something in there to bring you into the control area. So some couple of cut lines will do that. Beef up the edge there. Looks good. So now I'm dropping just some debris and dots on the floor to sell that this is actually sitting on cement or some kind of runway. And usually when they're sitting on the ground, it's not too clean. The ground's got little rocks on it or something, just to help sell that it is sitting on something. Putting more panel lines in there. Other side repeated. Right, that is a big shape, so I gotta make sure it doesn't feel out of scale. Right, if the panels are too big, right, it's gonna start looking out of scale. So I'm adding quite a bit of panels here and there to really help that out. Zoom in and show what I mean. Right, got all the details. Very loose, loose sketch. And what I mean by loose is that the perspective hopefully is correct, but the way the line art is being put on, it's drawn really quickly. No ruler in the lines, the corners don't connect perfectly, and that's what gives the illusion that it's loose. Not loose necessarily because it's just sketched out of the blue, and the perspective is off and things here and there, but it's still pretty correct. Now I'm going to lay a ruler and just really reinforce our perspective between shapes. For example, there's a perspective line there. I'm going to lay these in, and these perspective lines are going to help the viewer, when they see the sketch, to really see that this drawing is lying in a perspective view, right? Because they can see that lines are converging together, right? And it also helps me just to see if the overall drawing is correct or not by putting these lines in. You could do a last minute check. So for example, right there, I could see that the bottom part of that engine, that little wing or scoop, is repeated correctly on the other side. So right now all the lines are converging, right, to a point, onto the left. They're all converging, which is good. Last minute touches, and I think this drawing is almost ready for marker. Looks pretty good to me. Just little dents here and there, a little noodling going on here. Just make sure it feels right. Okay, last minute details, and I think we're ready for markers now. Alright. Oh, last minute check, make sure that pops. Okay. So ready to marker, and here are our markers we're going to use. We've got 30% and a 50% cool gray. Alright. These are probably the only two I'm going to use. I might go dark if necessary, but for now we're going to stick to cool gray 30, cool gray 50. And we're going to start out light, okay, with 30% right here. Marker is something that's a building process. You don't want to start too dark, because if you mess up using a marker that's too dark, right, it's very hard to correct. So by using a light marker, it's a lot easier to do. You can even go lighter. Let's try a 10%. If you're not that confident, use a 10% to do the initial marker, just until you feel right that the lighting is correct. So in this case, it's going to say the light is coming pretty much directly from above. So anything on the side are not going to receive much light. So that stuff is all going to go dark, right? Or change value, basically. So the top of this form is going to stay relatively bright, leaving the white of the paper to do that for us. Okay? And the rest of it is going to have a little value on it. You really want your form to turn, right, from one side to another, and that's what the whole point of marker is to help turn these forms and describe the shape further. So let's go back to the 30. The 10% is too light, right? But it's just to warm you up. So we know all the side panels are going to get hit, so we're going to put marker on all those areas. Let me zoom in so you guys can see. Now marker is a quick medium. See how fast I'm doing the marker with? It's not really a medium to be used slowly. The slower you go, you actually run into a couple of problems. One of the major ones is that the marker dries and you have streaks. When you work nice and quick, the marker stays pretty juicy. So as you go through your form, go through your rendering, all that blends together and actually voids any section lines that's running through your drawing. Going here with a juicier marker, still 30%. The other one is using a little dry, so I switch a little bit. Notice a little leak of marker right there, right? We're going to correct that later, you know. It's a little mistake. We could leave it if you want, but that's quite a bit of a bleed, right? Because the marker I picked up was brand new, so I should have probably tested another paper. But it's okay. We'll fix that later. You know, can't stress out about things like that because you're going to run into it. And if you get too stressed out, you know, you can waste a lot of time worrying about it. So we're going to go on and continue and make the rest of it work. Let's go ahead and render in the rest. That shape right there is almost a cylindrical compressed shape. So it's going to have a little bit of core highlight. Let's go in here and continue marking. Again, going pretty quickly with the marker to avoid streaks. And another tip about marker is when you're rendering it, you want to follow the design of the form. For example, if the panels run vertically on your design, then you can marker vertically. Just in case you do have marker streaks come up on your sketch, it actually helps you design. They act like panel lines, right? For example, right there. I'm going to help reinforce the engine goes in that direction by markering in that direction. So that guy, see that? How it's built? It's built in that direction, so I'm going to marker in that direction. The thing to not really do with marker is to do checkerboarding, which is crisscrossing, markering vertically and then going horizontally, because that creates a marker board effect, especially if your marker is a little dry. Right? Anywhere a marker crosses with itself, it's going to get darker. It builds on itself. So when you do vertical and then horizontal, anywhere they cross, you're going to have a little dots of a darker value here and there. And it's very difficult to actually get rid of that. So whenever you're darkening another area, for example down here, I'm going to follow the previous marker lines, right? I'm going to go in the same direction. For example, right there, same direction. I'm not going to go vertically here. I'm going to go horizontally across. So it just adds nicely into the original marker. It's going to bleed together. And since I'm doing it pretty quick, the marker is not really drying out that fast. Especially if you're using marker paper. I'm drawing this stuff on regular copy paper, which tends to be absorb marker pretty quickly. But if you're using a marker paper, it's a lot better. Okay, adding value here and there to pop this form out. Right. So everything that's above a shape basically facing the sky, it's not getting that much marker. It's going to stay there. Okay, let's go to the 50. Right, we built it up already with the 30. Let's go in here and really darken some of the areas up. So these are areas that's really not receiving that much light. It's staying in shadow. For example, these grills on the engine. Now the best way to turn a form is actually all you need is 3 values. All you need is a light, a medium, and a dark. So the light in this case is the white of the paper. So if you want that to really read, you don't touch it at all. You don't put any marker over the white, and that's going to become a light value. And the 30% I use is kind of our medium value. Now the darker value in this case, if you're working with 3 only, is going to be pure black. But we don't want to do that in this case because it's going to become very graphic if we put black for our darker side. So we're going to just bring in a little 50 and add a little bit here. Now that line just put on the engine, see how the value is darker even though it's on top? That is not a form change, but relative, it's a design, right? It's, for example, if they paint an airplane with stripes, those stripes, if the airplane is white and they paint a black stripe across it, you can have a value change. And that's what those lines on the engines are. And they kind of help describe the form. So I'm going to put one in here too to help describe the form of this nose cone here, which has a slight curve on the top and straight on the side. So by putting in a paint mark, the darker value, I'm going to help that further. Go across, right? For example, that's a paint, and then curve across. See that line alone really describes what's going on with forms there. Same with this piece right here. Put it slightly on the curve, and now it's going to help read that. So that's not a value change. Remember, this is, think of it as paint scheme on a vehicle. Continue darkening some areas here and there. The marker always builds on itself, so even if you have a 50% marker, if you keep building it, you can probably get to a 60 or 70 with a marker if you keep building on top of it. But you can only do so much as well. You are working on paper, and so over time, if you keep doing a marker, your paper might give away here. Let's check the values, turn it upside down, see if it's working. Looks pretty good. So again, check your drawing by spinning it, because every time you spin it upside down, you're seeing it from a complete different view. So if your eyes is too used to seeing it in the view that you're drawing it at, just spin the page around. Add another paint line, right? Help describe that form, which is a little, almost like a cover piece. I'm going to go in here. The back right here is not beefy enough, so let's beef that up. Looks good. Beef that up a little bit. Right, so after you put the marker in, you're going to have to work back and forth. See if the drawing is still reading. See if your line weight is still holding up. Right, for example, right there, line weight is starting to go away a little bit. That shape is starting to melt into the bottom of the spaceship there. So I'm going to pop it back in with some darker line weight. Alright, looks good. Add some more details here and there. So, when you're done with one process, it doesn't mean that you're done with that process alone. So if you're done inking, it doesn't mean once you start marking, you can't go back and ink it. Okay, you can always go back and work in and out. There's no really set rule with this kind of stuff. Let's go in here and draw the other side of that wing. You barely see it, but I'm going to indicate it just a little bit. Right, measuring it out. Okay. go back now and the 30% here. Just smooth out some more forms and render a little bit more gradients into these shapes. Looks good. Let's do a check here and make sure everything's okay. Okay, I think I'm going to start laying in the shadow, but I don't want it to go too dark. Right? If it's too dark, it's going to start competing with my shape here. Right? Especially if I use the 50%, then that's going to be the same value at the bottom of the ship. So I'm going to start pretty light, just to make sure the shadow is in the correct position. So I'm using actually 10% here. And I think that might work. Again, it's up to you. You can actually make the shadow a part of your design or layout of this drawing. You can actually use black if you want, but it might be too strong for this piece. But 30% could be good as well. I'm just using the 10% for now. See if it works or not. Again, you could calculate, drop your lines down until it hits the ground, and that's how you calculate ground shadow. It's very easy to do. Lay that in. And I think 10% might work. It looks dark enough and convincing enough that it is a shadow being casted and that it's not part of the design. I'm not going to put an ink line around my shadow because that's going to kind of start competing and defeat the whole purpose. Right? If I put an ink line around my shadow, some people might get confused and think that that's actually part of design. It could look like it's a big panel that fell off the bottom of the vehicle. So I'm going to leave it ghosted just with marker alone. So everything I'm doing right now is all pretty loose. I'm not making sure that the shadow is perfectly correct. Right? As long as it serves its purpose, it's holding the shape up, it's describing some of it, it's fine. And the advantage of putting a ground shadow is it actually helps describe a lot of your design as well. For example, those little fins that stick out in the front and also on the engine. By looking at the shadow, you can already tell what they're doing. Right? They're definitely coming out from the vehicle.